Kremlin ambitions are turning to ashes. Every strike by the Ukrainian armed forces literally paralyzes Russia. This is being talked about for the first time. Ukraine is grabbing Putin by the throat. The energy war is sparking with revenge. Prime targets are already in the sights of Ukrainian defenders. Panic and fear among Russians is just the beginning. The shutdown of the Kremlin's military machine, now that's a real catastrophe. It's creeping closer and closer to Russia. Life on pause, blackout in Moscow. A clear signal things will only get worse. The Ukrainian armed forces have lifted the curtain on what awaits the enemy as soon as tomorrow. You need to hear this.
More and more Russian cities are plunging into darkness. If the Russians attack Ukraine's energy system, Ukraine will attack Russia's. The Ukrainian authorities warned about this, and the defense forces have demonstrated it clearly. This is what the Voronezh thermal power plant looks like now, for example. It was attacked on November 9th. They say there were at least 3 hits. After the explosions, part of the city was left without electricity. Voronezh...
This is such a serious bridge. They work in the military, including electronics. There are aviation enterprises, military enterprises, and public enterprises.
And this is exactly the difference between Russian and Ukrainian strikes on the power system. In addition to a deserved response, the goal of Ukrainian defenders is to plunge into darkness those energy infrastructure facilities that support the operation of the Russian defense industry.
A dual purpose, so to speak, if you will. To show Russia that not only can they do it, but we can also respond in kind to certain things. And truly try to bring to a halt their machine and undermine the military-industrial complex that is actively working against us in this war.
I think this trend will continue, that is, at first glance following the principle of pecking at the liver. Russian energy systems will gradually have various elements of their infrastructure knocked out, so at first glance it will just look like that. Well, it's nice that somewhere in Belgorod or Voronezh people were left without power, but let's think about it. In some ways, the configuration of the Russian energy system might be similar to ours, in the sense that power supplied through the same power lines can go not only, say, to residential areas, but also, for example, to industrial facilities and railway transport.
That's why all such attacks are not random. The goal is not just to respond, but to respond painfully, so that the facilities supplying power to the military-industrial enterprises of the aggressor country cannot fuel the Kremlin's ambitions.
When various elements of the integrity of the Russian energy system are gradually bitten off like this, it primarily means that somewhere a train carrying something the Russians need for the war will stop, or there will be a blackout schedule at a factory. That produces things necessary for the Russians for the war, and...
Not all such enterprises are deep in the rear, experts say. Many facilities are located close to the Ukrainian border. For example, strategic bombers Tu-95 MS are repaired in Taganrog, and one of the manufacturers of components for the Russian missile program, specifically solid fuel for Iskanders, is located just 150 kilometers from the border with Ukraine. It is indeed possible to plunge them into electrical darkness. There are undoubtedly such important facilities for the Russian military-industrial complex in the Moscow region as well. But why stop at Moscow?
I think the psychological effect of plunging Moscow into darkness would be much more effective than just hitting a few factories there, because it's precisely this main mass, what do you call them? The office plankton, who live off the regions. Finally, it will dawn on them that something is happening and that something needs to be done.
In this way, Ukraine will kill not 2 but 3 birds with 1 stone at once. A just response is the paralysis of Russian military-industrial complex facilities and psychological pressure on the Kremlin. Sounds like the perfect target for the next blackout.
The Russians are urgently advancing on Pokrovsk. Putin's army has received a new order. The dictator's soldiers are seeping in like rats. Our forces are meeting the enemy not with bread and salt, but with a barrage of fire. The confrontation of the year, Donbass groans. The Russian army can barely keep up with this pace of war. Fake victories served up with a side of lies. This battle for Pokrovsk has torn off all the masks. What shocking truth became known to Russians during this decisive moment? of the so-called special military operation and what will it mean for them. We'll tell you about it in just a moment.
Pokrovsk is on the brink. Fighting there is non-stop, and the Russians are shelling the city with every weapon they have.
Ukraine's defense forces are holding on to a high-rise residential district. It is precisely the use of these high-rise buildings that gives Ukraine's defense forces an advantage, allowing them to significantly improve their tactical positions. Moreover, the intensity of strikes on the positions of Ukraine's defense forces in the Pokrovsk direction using guided bombs reaches 200 to 300 per day. In addition, the occupiers' tactics involve so-called combined attacks. That is, they use both guided bombs and accordingly heavy flamethrower systems.
It is reported that the defense forces managed to break the enemy's encirclement in the area of the Pokrovsk pocket, which allowed Ukrainian defenders
At the moment, Ukraine's defense forces are conducting stabilization operations to prevent further advances by Russian occupation troops.
Syrskyi notes that Russia has deployed 150,000 troops and plans to encircle Pokrovsk and neighboring cities.
In parallel with Pokrovsk, the occupiers are sharply intensifying combat operations in the Lyman direction. There, enemy groupings number around 90,000 personnel. So, as we can see, they are simultaneously trying to attack in several directions at once with a specific goal. Accordingly, the goal is to capture the territories of Donetsk region that are controlled by Ukraine's defense forces.
But how many Russians will die for these cities? The bunker grandpa doesn't really care, but a Russian blogger still decided to talk about it.
And so, for the sake of two small towns, Russia has already killed 80 to 100,000 of its own soldiers. Russia killed them. Not Ukrainians killed them, Russia killed them.
But of course, what's the big deal about those 100,000 people, right? Putin surely knows what he's doing, doesn't he? Or does he just not care at all? In
Germany, during the period when it was actively capturing and occupying Norway, France, and Poland, actually lost fewer people in total than Russia has lost for these two relatively small towns. This comparison highlights the significant difference in casualty.
The commander-in-chief of the armed forces reported that Russia is preparing a final maneuver with the aim of capturing the entire Donetsk region.
They plan, after possibly capturing Pokrovsk, to transfer all operational reserves. Let me emphasize again, that's about 170,000 troops, to seize the Sloviansk-Kramatorsk agglomeration. This is what the Russian military command is planning. So both the fighting in Pokrovsk and accordingly, from there, the immediate objective of the Russian occupation army is to take control of districts in the Donetsk region.
Meanwhile, Z channels are publishing videos of Russian troops entering Pokrovsk. Strangely enough, after 4 years of war, they are thanking the fog. But just as they entered, they perished. It seems the fog is not a very reliable ally. Ukrainian soldiers are not giving up an inch to the Russians and are eliminating them one by one.
The settlement has been completely cleared, and considering its strategic importance, it's a key logistical component of the route that passes through this settlement. It is now under the control of the armed forces of Ukraine. The armed forces of Ukraine are conducting successful counter-offensive actions in the area of the settlement of Shafov.
Later, precisely because of this, Russia began a mass recruitment of volunteers to guard important facilities from drones. But we know very well where these volunteers will end up before long.
In fact, a covert mobilization is underway in the Russian Federation.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
Right now, Poland is making a strong move. The Kremlin is shocked by this. Warsaw is mobilizing its forces and supplying weapons to the armed forces of Ukraine with renewed vigor. Our ally is reaching the highest level of support. Armored vehicles are going straight from the factories to the front lines. Artillery is being loaded right on the way. Helicopters and fighter jets are taking direct aim at destroying the enemy. You have to see this. columns of equipment are on standby. Ukraine will receive massive reinforcements. Russia is about to get a response it will remember for a long time. With every new batch of weapons, the Kremlin nervously gasps for air. Will Poland pull the final lever that will crush Moscow? We'll find out in just a moment.
Over 120 billion zlotys, or $4 billion. That's the significant amount Poland has spent since the start of the full-scale invasion on aid to Ukraine. This includes both humanitarian and military support.
Poland was one of the first countries to provide Ukraine with tanks, ammunition, and defense equipment on a large scale. In 2022 to 2023, it delivered, among other things, over 300 tanks, as well as armored personnel carriers, artillery systems, air defense systems, drones, mortars, assault rifles, and more than 100 million rounds of ammunition. 10 airplanes and helicopters were also sent to Ukraine. Between 2022 and 2024, Poland provided Ukraine with 47 military aid packages. The value of the equipment delivered in 2022 alone amounted to 7.23 billion zlotys, and in 2023 to 2024, another 5.63 billion. Poland also supplied more than 19,500 Starlink terminals, providing the Ukrainian armed forces with stable satellite communication. This accounted for almost half of all terminals used in Ukraine by the end of 2023.
Poland's assistance to Ukraine is not the result of some romantic infatuation, but is very pragmatic. Our neighbors understand that if Ukraine falls, Poland will be next.
After all, a fighting Ukraine gives Europe time to better prepare for threats. This time is needed, and we have no right to waste a single minute. Every minute counts. We will be held accountable for every minute.
318 tanks were transferred to Kyiv by Warsaw. Among them are modernized T-71s, M1Rs, PT-91s, and Leopard 2S. This is more than anyone else has provided. The total value of the free aid, including training, logistics, repairs, and medical support up to March of this year, exceeded $4 billion. In particular, in 2022, it amounted to $1.6 billion, and in 2023 to 2024, it was $1.3 billion. Poland also provided
Poland's military assistance: 586 armored vehicles, 137 artillery systems, 10 MiG-24 helicopters, 10 MiG-29 fighter jets, 287 man-portable air defense systems, 44 air-to-air missiles, over 100 units of small arms, 89 mortars, 4 Grad multiple launch rocket systems, and more than 100 million rounds of ammunition.
In addition to free aid, in just 2022 to 2023, Ukraine purchased weapons from Poland worth more than 2.2 billion euros. The largest contract was the agreement for 56 Krab self-propelled howitzers, of which 36 have already been delivered. The countries are establishing joint production of weapons and equipment. The parties have agreed on the joint production of 125mm tank ammunition. There are also plans for joint production of other weapons and military equipment, including the placement of Polish companies' manufacturing facilities in Ukraine.
It is necessary to mobilize the industry. Polish and Ukrainian industries should make joint investments not only during the war, but also to develop their deterrence potential. These initiatives are very much needed. It is also very important for us to improve economic relations. We support Ukraine.
Poland has become the main hub for supplying weapons to Ukraine. Also, during the war, more than 30,000 Ukrainian soldiers have undergone training on the territory of the country. With each year of the war, the assistance and joint cooperation between Poland and Ukraine only grows stronger.